So today we're going to be discussing cosmopolitanism and Hellenism. There's a lot of stuff in this chapter, but I think we really are going to need to have to do this online, we're going to have the one focus a week, and this is going to be our focus. So the question here, as you can be reading, is what is cosmopolitanism? How do we see cosmopolitanism in the time of Hellenism? And that's from 350 BCE to 250 CE. And what were some reactions to Hellenistic cosmopolitanism? And we're looking at the Judea, Romans, and Carthage as specific examples. And those are what I'm going to be talking about in the lecture. And then the last part of the question, what insights do reactions to Hellenism give us to current reactions to Americanism? You're going to be looking at in your discussions. And that's going to be what we're going to be that's what we're going to be discussing. Not kind of discussing, it's what we're going to be discussing. Okay, so what is cosmopolitanism? And this, you should be aware that this is still a word that we're used a lot today. This is still a common word. And what literally it means is cosmo means the world. And the polit is like this, it's a kind of this government. And what it literally means is citizens of the world. If you're cosmopolitan, you're not part of one specific place. You consider yourself a citizen of the whole world. You have a much broader global identity. And, there are people like that today. So, you don't think of yourself as only a New Yorker or only an American, even, but it's a part of a broader world. And that's, again, a word that people use today. To be cosmopolitanism, it's seen as also being sophisticated and worldly. But it came up, it's a Greek word, and the first instance of this word, cosmopolitanism, was following the conquest of Alexander the Great. And he's Alexander of Macedonia. He was alive. He died pretty young, 336 to 323 BCE. I'm going to have you read the details of his conquests in your textbook. That's why your textbook is so important. So I don't want to just repeat what's in it, but basically just as an overview, he began with a successful attack on the Persian Empire. He reached Egypt in the Indus Valley, modern-day India. And then his empire actually fell apart pretty soon after his death, his fairly young death. But he brought the whole world together. And what's interesting is that Hellenism, the love of, I actually took this back, okay. Hellenism actually far outlasted the Greek Empire. And so you can see the effect of the Greek, Greece is obviously a fairly small, I guess you can't see my arrow going around, but if you can find Greece on here, and you can see all the way to India, to what's modern day India, northern India. You can see it in the Middle East. You can see it through North Africa. You can look at these conquests, and all these conquests, even after the conquest stopped, Hellenism still influenced them. Okay? I'm going to go back. Okay, hopefully this is working. Okay, to be a cynic is to be somebody who doesn't believe things, who is you just don't believe anything. You're just kind of detached from everything. You don't really care about things. To be cynical is to not be engaged, to not care about things. And just like anything anybody says, you just automatically don't trust them. Epicureanism, that's when you love food and drink. And that's something that comes in, and that's what they do. In Stoicism, that's almost the most interesting. If you're a Stoic person, you're a person who doesn't get upset in the face of tragedy. So tragedies can happen and you just stay calm. That's what those things mean. So those are still, again, important words today. You can read about the original Greek in your text. And then you have a growth of individualism, including individual ideas of salvation. And that's important as well, to be the idea of the individual being important rather than the community. Again, some cultures, America is right now a very, very individualist country. Some countries are now more communal-based, but this is when the idea of the importance of the individual, including an individual finding salvation for themselves, that hasn't always been a concept that was popular, but it became popular at this point. Okay, so this is a famous, a kind of a very famous example of Greek sculpture that I am just showing you here. The theater at Syracuse, again, these kind of theaters that you saw, these kind of Greek amphitheaters. And again, they even have some of their descendants today. But you saw these kind of all over, you saw these all over the world. This is, ancient Syracuse, not Syracuse, New York right now. But you can kind of see some now. And this is kind of another example of Demetrius said Bactria, child was the king of the Indians as well as the Greeks. Again, the king Menander is remembered by Buddhists for his curiosity about their theology. And you can see this. What's really interesting about this is you see this. There's a Greek legend, and then there's Indian writing. So this really shows, this is something that's largely forgotten, how important Greek influence was in India at this time as well. It's just the extent of this, and these kind of multicultural. This is very, again, cosmopolitan. You have these two, quite different languages, as you're seeing here. And so again, you're seeing the goddess Nike here, a Greek god, and surrounded by Indian letters. So you start having what they call multicultural cities. And you have Alexandria, Egypt, was a primary example. That was the first really big major multicultural city where they had people from all over the world. You have Greek troops spreading across the world. The other thing, and this is something that in my original plan we were going to have a special question about, but this will help you understand Spartacus, which we're going to watch soon, is the plantation slavery. Plantation slavery was obviously bad for the slaves themselves. People were captured all over. This is, from all over the world and forced to work on plantations. But it was also bad for the free peasants, because once they had slaves, the inequality grew worse, and the wealthier people, the wealthier landowners got wealthier and wealthier, and they'd have their slaves work, and the free peasants just couldn't keep up. So a lot of the free peasants had to actually sell their land at low prices and go to urban areas and be impoverished urban workers. So plantation slavery hurt everybody. Well, it didn't actually, the plantation owner, I guess it didn't hurt them, because they actually got wealthier and wealthier. And the empire had to appeal to a broad range of cultures in their realms. But we're going to go, but just so you know this, we're going to go back to plantation slavery when we talk about Spartacus. But just note this now. But empires, because you have an empire, so you have these bigger and bigger political units after Alexander's conquests. And so rather than just have one particular culture, they had to appeal to a broad range of cultures. And you see this now. That's kind of in the nature of an empire. Okay, Silk Road and Indian Ocean trade. That's an important thing to remember. If you're going to be a teacher especially, you really need to know the Silk Road, but it's used enough culturally. It's a valuable thing for everybody to know. The Silk Road was identified from 100 BCE. The first written reference was 113 BCE. 400 years later, we see Roman references to the Great Silk Road. The term the Silk Road actually wasn't really popular until the 19th century. It was only really mapped in the 20th century. A lot of times when you hear the Silk Road, people picture this one long, huge road that people could just zip down on. But actually, they were, as your text says, they were a bunch of actually short roads. That's actually really kind of important to remember, kind of short distances. Not one road that was built, but the silk was so valuable that gave its name. And of course, silk came from China. It enabled goods to travel much further distances, and this contributed to multiculturalism. Even though there wasn't one road that, there's almost a myth I think I've heard, but this is not true. I want to really make sure that you understand this is not true, that goes from China to Rome, that you could just, silk would just flow easily. It didn't flow easily from one big road. It was a lot of short distances, but you do see goods traveling much more. So the Silk Road was very important in traveling many more roads. And my daughter is right here, and she is just telling me, she wrote me a little note as I'm talking, she told me that she knows the Silk Road. So I think it is something that comes up. She's 9, she's going to be 10 in 2 days, actually. All right, Indian Ocean trade. This is what's called the second silk trade, actually. You had Arab and Indian sailors were very prominent here. They transported silk, furs, fragrances, olive oil, Greek drinking vessels. And what you really want to get out of this is that you had this global trade that you didn't have before. So some of it was the Indian Ocean trade, and some of it was on we call now the Silk Road, although they didn't call it the Silk Road then. Or some people did refer to a Silk Road, but it wasn't as commonly used then. So you're having these silks, furs, fragrances, olive oil, Greek drinking vessels, all these different things traveling all over the place. And so again, this is really something that really brought the world together in a very dramatic way. Now, nomadic traders were really important here too. They don't leave behind records, so it's easy to forget, but I want you to remember them. they had historically been the most important way of connecting sedentary societies. Now you have merchants and people who weren't nomadic that were important as well, but they still continue to be. They retain their importance. So a sedentary society, just so you understand, are societies that stay put, like a normal agricultural society. And you'd have these nomads that would go back and forth, and they actually were the way that people who were just in their agricultural societies, you had a limited range of goods. The nomadic people helped you, if you were in one of those societies, get goods from other places. And because of their great travel, they tended to have greater resistance to disease. It was really important in their ability to travel because they'd done it since they were young. So they had these different disease environments. Whereas if a sedentary person had just suddenly decided to head off to like 2,000 miles away or even 200 miles away, they would get a different disease environment, and they would have a great chance of dying actually. So a lot of the trade, a lot of people just couldn't travel in the same way that they can today. So anyway, remember that nomadic traders were important. And this map, just look at it closely. This is just meant to give you a sense of how trade worked. So just kind of marvel at this. Look at China, the Han Empire, which we're going to talk more about next week. And then look how it went through the Middle East, and look at what's kind of connected. Now remember, the Americas are not connected at this point, and Western Europe is not the center of this trade. If you kind of look at where the center is, so just kind of look at the map and see where the center of the trade is and where it's not. You can see that China is really important in this. Obviously, China was supplying the silk that was so important and so valuable. You can see the importance of the Middle East, in Egypt. But what we call Western Europe now, it was part of the trade, but not a prime part of the trade. All right, so these are responses to Hellenism, and the reason why they're so interesting is that you can see echoes. This is something I want you to think about. You can see echoes in how people respond to Americanism today. So among the Jewish community, you had some people who were Jewish who wrote in Greek, who became very, very Hellenized, what they call Hellenized, very, very Greek, and that was the main culture. But you had also a lot of ideas that the Greek culture was corrupting, that it was wrong. And the Maccabee Revolt, 167 BCE, was very much part of that. I'm going to let you read more detail about that in your text, but that was kind of important of that. And the idea that Hellenism was immoral. So there was a debate about what about the morality of Hellenism. And you can see that today. Some people find American ideas immoral as well. Now, the Romans, we're going to read more about the Romans next week, but they came and people saw them as kind of rough. They were powerful, but they were kind of militaristic at first, and they were seen as somewhat culturally rough. And the way to become civilized during this time was to know about Greek. The Greeks defined the idea of civilization. So it was to speak spoken Greek. And it was also to understand Greek. Some of you, I wish I could see you guys right now because I could ask you this question. And my daughter and I have read these two, the Percy Jackson, and you can see the Romans and the Greeks, which is, so some of you may have read the Percy Jackson books. And that's kind of interesting. They get into this. So basically, there was the Greek mythology, and so what's most famous is how the Romans took the Greek gods but gave them new names, and to some extent, new personalities, or they added to the personality. And that's a really great idea. But what they were doing, what's maybe not so obvious from the Percy Jackson books, is how they were using civilization. But they also had a lot of concern about losing their own culture and language, and that's why. And you can kind of see this today. So. They wanted to have, the Greeks were the way to prove civilization. That's one of the reasons why they adopted the Greek gods. But they tried to make them their own, and they were concerned about using their own culture and language. And eventually, of course, Latin became a kind of what they call lingua franca. It became a kind of international language. But at this time, originally, it was Greek. So they wanted to prove to people they were civilized. They did that through the Greek influence. But they also cared a lot about losing their own cultures and their own traditions. And then, so you have that, but then when you look at Carthage, and it's Tunisia, it's modern-day Tunisia in North Africa, you have an adaptation of Hellenism. And so you have a lot of that. You have a mixture of North African and Greek styles where it's kind of melted together. And you see that a lot, too. You see people taking things like, even though pizza was originally Italian, pizza, we know, is kind of an American thing, and it seemed kind of American. But if you eat pizza in different cultures, different places, a lot of times they'll make it more their own. It'll change. McDonald's is seen as a big thing of Americanization, but each McDonald's in each culture has had to adapt to its local culture. And that same kind of thing happened then as well, okay? And here's the question that I would, if we were in class, I'd have you break into groups and talk about this. What does this tell us about Americanization, about modern day cosmopolitanism? So how can we use this to understand? And this is what I want you to do this is what I want you to do in our discussion group. I want you to kind of address these questions. Ideally, after the lecture, will kind of help you with this, to think about this. All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I would love to be able to see you, and I really hope you're all staying well. Please don't hesitate to contact me with any problems, okay? All right, bye.